.357 Magnum old school border patrol load. Our 110 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. These are only rated at 1295 feet per second, and they're a 110 grain bullet. And I'm going to test these in my 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 686 and my 2-inch barrel Taurus 605 to see how they do in a service size gun versus a snub nose revolver. So 110 grain. And these are loaded really light because the fact that if you load a 110 grain to full capacity, you actually have a higher powder charge than a 125 grain bullet. What happens when you do that is a 110 grain bullet is so short from the nose of that bullet to the base of that bullet that it will clear the cylinder gap and be in the barrel before all that excess powder is burning, which will pretty much cause a lot of flame cutting in revolvers. And it'll also be a negative thing for like a 340 PD with the titanium cylinder, with all that cylinder gap gas getting all over that. So to alleviate that issue, for a long time, the main thing you do is just simply load them really light. So you have a better recoiling round, just easier to control, and we don't have that flame cutting issue. So like I said, these were used by the Border Patrol until about the mid-90s, and I believe the U.S. Marshals may have used this load as well. I'm not 100% sure, but Winchester Defense is our load here, and that used to simply be the Winchester white box hollow points. Within the past couple of years, Winchester switched over to using a black box for their defensive hollow points and keeping the white box for their target ammo. So we'll see what we get in a ballistic gel test here. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to hit my 10% clear ballistic blocks test here. I'm going to go into plain clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim or anything like that in the way to clog a hollow point. And then we'll move on to a real world simulation where I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle. After that, a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another piece of medium density fiberboard that's going to represent our back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of flesh. So instead of 3 inches and 16 inches like the actual measurements here, it's more like the density of 1.5 inches pectoral muscle and 8 inches of flesh in a living target. So we'll do a plain clear ballistic shot, then a real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up, we're going to run this in our 4-inch barrel over the chronograph, and then we'll see what we get out of the 2-inch barrel. So we are rated at 1295 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel like what I'm using. Let's see how close I get to 1295 feet per second out of my Smith & Wesson 686 here. $11.98. $12.95. 1467, interesting. 1344. 1326. 1398. So that's very interesting result. Not very consistent. You know, we had like over a 200 feet per second spread there, but most of them were in the 1300s there. Very interesting to see velocity like that. Let's see what we get here in our 2-inch barrel. See how close we get to that 1295. $12.22. $12.11. $12.27. $12.51. So it appears that they are kind of loaded a little bit warmer than what I thought they were going to be loaded. But I will say this, they did not feel like a 357 Magnum. You know, I'm expecting a ton of recoil in this, and I'm not really feeling a whole lot of recoil in it. Definitely not Magnum level. It's more like shooting a 9mm plus P, a little bit greater than that out of a subcompact pistol, but you know, just the recoil in my hand wasn't that high. So let's hit our ballistics gel block, see how these compare. All right, our first shot in the plain clear ballistics. No denim in the way to clog a hollow point, no rib simulation to slow down penetration. Our best potential for our hollow point expansion and penetration. So let's see what we get here through our 4-inch barrel. Something weird's going on there. Let me shoot it one more time. All right, put that through our 2-inch barrel. go take a look. All right, so I don't know what's going on with that first shot. It vanished. There's a big chunk of lead in this first 3 inches that went through and then fell out. And I think it went underneath this block somehow. So it arced down for some reason. But our second shot went in straight in. What I'm seeing here though, our first 3 inches is a massive amount of energy dump and damage. 4 inch on the bottom or 2 inch on top. Just a lot of there's a lot of fragmentation pieces still in there with that 4 inch barrel. Fragmenting apart. Our core is definitely smaller. And what we got with our 4 inch barrel is we got about 11.5 inches. With the way this camera picks up parallax, you'll probably think I'm not seeing it right and it's at 12 inches. But yeah, it's about 11, just shy of 11 inches. 11.5 inches, just shy of 11.5. Now with our 2 inch barrel, we actually had less fragmentation and the bullet held together better, bigger mushrooming, but we only penetrated to 9 inches of penetration. So definitely over penetration there, but you know, we don't have fabric in the way, we don't have rib simulation in the way, and I think those things, you know, I never like to judge what I get with stuff with plain clear ballistics shots. That's why I do my real world simulation, because I think that will, you know, tell you a little bit more about how they would really perform in the real world. So let's put on our fabric, put in our rib simulation, see how they compare in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material. And people might say that's not realistic, but look what I'm wearing. Almost exactly, that's actually one of my old shirts like this. 4 layers of sweatshirt material. We have 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent a pectoral muscle, a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent head, ribs, or sternum, 16 inches of clear ballistics, and another rib simulation. Let's see how this does in our 4 inch barrel. All right, let me set that back up. We'll hit it with the 2 inch barrel. All right, real world simulation 2 inch barrel. Let's see how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, so I was hoping to get some improved performance, and I really didn't. Kind of went the other way. And here's why. It's energy dumping so incredibly well that these are the holes going through our rib simulation. 4 inch barrel right here, 2 inch barrel up here. You might have noticed that I've been using tape lately. Not only does that look like bone better, but yeah, this type of thing would happen a lot. We completely mangled that. So that did a lot of damage here. We got a lot of fragmentation pieces, and our penetration went to about 10.25 inches with our 4 inch barrel. Kind of the same thing happened with the 2 inch barrels that happened in plain gel. We have a really big expansion, not so much fragmentation, but we have an under penetration of about 8.25 inches of penetration here. So you got to look at this as a simulation here and realize that, you know, 8.25 inches really kind of simulates about 4 inches into a body, and that's including, you know, with the ribs, because I went through ribs, as we're here about 5 inches. So what that tells you is that is typically enough penetration with the front unshot, and with that much fragmentation, that's probably going to hurt to a level that's not normal, and probably stop a threat faster than rounds that, you know, so-called meet minimum penetration. I actually think these would be more effective. The problem is, you know, for law enforcement, you know, when they're trying to stop a threat that doesn't want to stop and they don't have very good shots and they end up making shots to the side through an arm, this is not going to reach a vital. It will not reach a vital with that kind of penetration. So that's why I look at things like this, and I think, you know, that 12-inch minimum is an important thing for law enforcement, but I kind of look at things a little bit differently when somebody's, you know, not looking for a reason for a cop to take them out, and, you know, they're not fighting to the death. They're just, you know, trying to get your wallet or something. I think this type of thing is very, very effective for the average concealed carrier, home defender, etc., but not so well when it comes to law enforcement. So seeing this penetration doesn't necessarily make me think it's a bad round. Seeing this makes me think, if you're proficient with that gun, this is probably going to do a lot better than a gold dot 9mm or something like that. So that's my honest opinion on this. I'm not just trying to like brag on the 357 Magnum. It has its limitations, obviously, and they changed, you know, law enforcement stopped using this for a reason, but it still could be very effective with the right shots. So let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them, then I'll shoot a steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, it took me a while to get all these fragments out of the gel block, including that first 3-inch piece. There was a lot of pieces in that, especially with the 4-inch barrel shots. So it was a bit of a forensic nightmare here to get these all out. With the 2-inch barrel, it was easy though. So going through plain gel, our 4-inch barrel, we have one core, and then we have 4 fragments, one of them being quite large. Just a whole bunch of different fragmentation with that 4-inch barrel. You know, some of this fragmentation was in the main gel block, some of it was in the first 3-inch piece. With our 2-inch barrel, we went to an expansion threshold where it just didn't bust apart. And we can see why we didn't get much penetration. We have a very, you know, short bullet there. And talk about mushrooming out, that's more like muffining out. That is a very big expansion through a 2-inch barrel. That's very, very impressive. Now going through our medium density fiberboard, things change up a little bit. Not so much with our 2-inch barrel. It pretty much did the same thing through our fabric and our rib simulation as what it did in plain gel. Doesn't look too bad overall. Really, really big expansion. But with our 4-inch barrel, we got kind of the same thing, but a little bit different here. It looks like the fabric lowered some of that explosion threshold a little bit. So we didn't have any lead pieces in the first 3-inch piece there, but in the main gel block here, we had a really big piece here. That's the entire skirt, I think. So really just a ton of explosion and expansion with the 4-inch barrel, but with the 2-inch barrel, we had a little bit better mushrooming. But this is the reason why, you know, through the 4-inch barrel we got better penetration, because, you know, it busted off those pieces. That little core there is going to go a little bit deeper. So very interesting here how these perform. So that's a close-up look at those. All right, 14 yards from the target. So this is my basic, you know, shootability drills here. I do this with every ammo just to see, you know, if I had to rapid fire these things, how would they do for me in a rapid fire situation. I'm 14 yards from the target to stay back enough, far enough, you know, because that is steel. But it also gives me a little bit greater challenge than if it were a real world simulation because, you know, typically those situations happen when you're much, much closer than 14 yards. So I feel like if I can do this at 14 yards rapidly, I feel confident in the ammo itself. And I think a lot of the things that happen, like with flinch and too much recoil, those apply to other people the same as they apply to me. So if I can do this, I feel like most other people can too. So let's say I get here with this load in the 4-inch barrel. I'm gonna get a sight picture and pop them off as fast as I think I can hit the target. You gotta remember, I'm not even looking at the back sights. I'm just trying to hit the target as fast as I can, not trying to group these real tight. 2-inch barrel, let's see how I can do with this. All right, I think we had a round that didn't fire there, as I loaded 5 rounds here, and I only counted 4. Yeah, we had a hard primer there. I'm gonna go single action with it because single action will give you a slightly harder hammer strike than double action. Let's see if this will fire. Alright, so a little bit hard primer there, but it did go off, so it's not completely a dead round. A real world situation, you would probably rotate that back around again and it would go off the second time hitting that. So not great, but it happens. Let's back up with these and see how they continue to shoot for me. All right, 40 yards from the target. I'm gonna see what I can do with these. 4-inch barrel, if I can make any hits. All right, I did miss one. I definitely can shoot better than that, so it could just be me today, but they did okay. Same deal with the 2-inch barrel here. That last one, I pulled that trigger before I was ready. You know, it's weird going from that Smith & Wesson to going to this because the triggers are completely different. That's why I've missed that first shot. It pulls through a little bit further and softer than the Smith & Wesson. So normally the Smith & Wesson would fire about there. This one's got a little bit to go. So then it's like, pull that shot. Let me back it up just for fun. These are shooting pretty good. I'll go back, I'll do some single action from 75 yards and get me out of the way as much as possible with my double action accuracy today. I'm not doing so well with that, and see how these continue to shoot from 75 yards. All right, 75 yards from the target, pretty much just for fun and for a challenge. So I'll go single action with these and see if I can make any hits. So 4-inch barrel, 75 yards, 110 grain, 357 mag. Huh, I don't know where that went. All right, so it's weird. I'm not really sure what was going on there because I'm aiming center. They were kind of going all over, but then the 2 times that hit, they hit center. That could have something to do with that wild velocity spread where we're seeing, you know, a couple 100 feet per second spread. That could do that, but it could just be me too. I'm not sure. 2-inch barrel. See what this does. All right, I don't know where that went. I can't even see it in impact where I'm hitting. Really high. Really low. To the right. To the right again. Way to the left. So that's not just me. I don't know if Parallax picked that up right, but if I'm aiming basically in the same spot and one hits to the right of the target by 2 feet and then it hits to the left of the target by 6 feet, yes, it is a snub nose, but there's no way I'm gonna be that far off because I shoot like this every week and they're generally just a little bit off, not like that, not a you know, a 10-foot spread there. So at distance, for whatever reason, these are not particularly accurate for me, and that could just have to do with those extreme velocities and the, you know, the nose of the bullet. They are lead and they do deform a little bit just from, you know, transporting them and whatnot. I think that probably has to do, that's probably the reason why there's not super consistent accuracy, because you don't have that bullet weight to work with of a heavier bullet. And I think that's probably part of it. But overall, interesting test here. The thing that stands out about this above all else is that out of the stub nose revolver here, and on my scale, this little Taurus weighs 20 ounces. The recoil isn't great at all. You know, in that first shot with the 4-inch barrel come back here, it surprised me because it feels like a 38 special. When you're shooting out of a 4-inch barrel, it feels like about like a warm 38 special. Out of the 2-inch barrel, it feels a little bit more recoil than a 38 special plus P. But it's just got a different recoil. I can't even describe it. It's different. It doesn't have that heavy thud or muzzle jump, while at the same time it has a good amount of recoil. Long story short, it's not painful to shoot even out of the snub. So I think it's a good compromise out of the snub nose versus carrying something like a 38 special, because, you know, accuracy was good enough. Our terminal ballistics, we had some under penetration, but we had massive expansion. Out of the 4-inch barrel, I wouldn't carry this because you could definitely get something a lot more effective than this. But for having recoil like 38 special, and another thing that might be good at is it's probably going to break up in walls a little bit easier than heavier bullets. So as a special purpose cartridge, I could see how this out of a 4-inch barrel would be okay for certain needs. But overall performance wasn't great, but these things did energy dump quite well. I'll give it that. So interesting test here today. So that's what you get today. So comment, share, and like. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I've been, not getting as many subscribers as I should be getting. So again, thanks for watching, guys.